Now we have a function, create calendar, that's going to generate the code for the table. And it's going to do that by simply adding to a string until it's all of the code needed for the table. Well, we're going to have other things. There's several things that we're going to be producing, right? We're going to be generating the caption that goes across the top of the calendar. We're going to generate rows and days. And so there's several things that we're going to be creating in this calendar. It's going to be pretty complex. So one of the ways to minimize complexity is to separate code into multiple functions. And we're going to do that. We're going to use that strategy to make things simpler and easier to maintain by creating separate functions. So the next function that we're going to do is a function that is going to create the caption. So create the caption for the table. And that's what this function is going to do. And it's going to be called calendar caption. And the calendar is abbreviated. And it needs a date as well. And so we'll give it this, we'll say it needs a calendar date as a parameter for it. So this is a function that's going to generate the caption. And to do that, it's going to be dealing with months. And there are 12 months that each have their own name, right? And we're going to be wanting to use those months. Well, one of the tools that we're going to be using in JavaScript is the array. And we're going to use this for these months. So let's learn a little bit about JavaScript arrays. So here is defined, notice you just still use the var definition and give it a name and equal. And then to create an array, you simply put in square brackets, right, the values for the arrays. Then you can access those values using an array index notation, right? So let's go down here and see where it shows you. Here it says you just put the name of the array followed by an index, and those indexes start with 0, right? And so that's how you access an individual element. So, and remember that it starts with 0, so that's really common, right? Another thing about arrays, one thing that's interesting about JavaScript arrays, the individual types don't have to match, so they don't have to all be strings. You can have a combination of strings and numbers and objects in an array. So that's kind of interesting. You can also access an entire full array. So this is kind of an interesting example. So if we go into this code, notice what it does. It has an array here that contains 3 strings, and then it actually prints the contents of that array out to this paragraph. And what do you get? You get a comma-separated list. And so you can actually just simply use the entire array all as one. Another thing, there are some properties. Oh, just so you know, arrays are actually objects in JavaScript. So that's kind of interesting. If you do the type of, you're going to get an object. That's what type it is. There are also some properties and methods that come along with arrays, which can be very handy. So there's a length property. So each array has a length, and it'll return the number of elements that are in that particular array. So here we have cars.length, and it says it has 3 when it had those 3 strings in it. You can also sort it. So just simply call the array.sort method. So interesting things that you can do with arrays. Some very similar to what you can do with arrays in other languages. Although the weakly typed languages allows you to put different varieties of types into a single element, into a single array. So that's pretty new. Well, let's use this idea of an array in our caption. So we're going to need an array for months. So let's figure out how we're going to do that. And this is really going to contain the month names. So we start with our using var to identify this as a variable, and we're going to do month name is going to be what we're going to call this array. And how do we start the array? with square brackets. And now in here we can just put the values. So here we have January, and then February. And here we're just going to write each name of the month. So you can just go ahead and do that. If you're a faster typer than me, you can skip ahead. And there's December, our last month. So now we have an array of month names, and they'll each have an index. So the index of January will be 0, the index of December will be 11, and we can access those individual names. Now this is using the literal values to create an array. So there's another way to create arrays if you want to, and that is to use the new operator. Let's see if I can find the example here for that. There it is. So a var cars equals a new array, and then in parentheses you put those values. So you can do that. That's just another way to define array. But you can, the way that we used is called the array literal method, where we actually define it literally by just defining the array with square brackets, right? Just opening square bracket, closing square bracket, and putting the values in there. And if you want to start an array empty and add values later, you can do that as well. And you just simply would be cars equals opening and closing brackets, and that would generate an empty array.